The Hunger Artist is Kafka at one of his more bizarre moments. He pulls together his somewhat trademark peculiarity in a curious new quality. There are buried in with his familiar, very dense verbal style, there are suggestive details that start tossing out little things that you can seize onto and ponder over, but he doesn't really provide any answers about them. He doesn't really give you a map of what is underneath this cloudy surface. There's a sense of something under there, but he never tells you what it is. And that leaves him very open-ended and available for critical perspectives. And it's kind of a free-for-all. You can say throughout Kafka's work, what is he doing? Is he making fun of stuff? Is he very serious? Is he, is this satire? Is this in earnest? Is this... There are no answers. There's no real sense of what he's doing. Only a general agreement that what he's doing is extraordinarily unique. And from the different angles you look at it, whether it's funny or serious or whatever, pretty much everybody agrees that in one way or the other, it's brilliant. So what does it really matter? If he's succeeding on all these fronts, why can't he be doing all of them simultaneously? Maybe. The story is fairly simple. It's a very familiar story, just couched in a bizarre setting. The story is of an artist, a person in popular showbiz, let's say, who rides a wave of public approval all the way to when his popularity begins to crest and then fall, and then you see him on the way down, and it is the tragic fall at the end. It's a very familiar story in any popular art, but the peculiarity of it comes from the actual kind of artist that he is, of course. And this is where things start to get weird. Ein Hungerkünstler in the original German is somebody who starves himself for public approval, for entertainment value. Somebody who simply stops eating and people would come by and gawk at him. The parallels to this being, well, it's a story of a literal starving artist, somebody who is suffering for his art and is only exposing himself to the public, and they just don't understand it. But for him, the purity of his motives is absolute. For others, they can say that, well, he's really just sort of mocking them, because ultimately the starving artist is just another sideshow freak and not necessarily doing anything constructive. To starve oneself is not a particularly productive act. He is not producing any art. He is simply suffering for it. And is the suffering itself the art? These are the sorts of the questions you get into without even realizing it, because the story just, it has nowhere else to go. The most immediately recognizable character of Kafka, I would say, is the world, or the sense of the world that he gives. It is always very otherworldly, oppressive, and claustrophobic, and he does this through a lot of ways. We get no names, nothing to really latch onto here, which is an extension of what he has done in many of the other works, but taken to a new extreme. We are given no names here. The hunger artist himself sort of evolves from the early paragraphs of it is just the hunger artist in a general classification sense, like this is what those people do. And it is only a couple of paragraphs in that you start to get a sense of, no, wait a minute, he's suddenly talking about one individual within that classification. I'm going to say, nothing annoyed the artist more than such watchers. They had made him miserable. They made his fast seem unendurable. Sometimes he mastered his feebleness sufficiently to sing during their watch for as long as he could keep going to show them how unjust their suspicions were. You suddenly get a singularity there. You suddenly get an individual within that group, still unnamed. We don't know who this person is, and there's really not a lot of significant details there to latch onto to distinguish him from others who are, in the same field. And this is part of it. He is buried. His individuality is suffocated within this broader category, within his culture, his civilization, if you will. Individuality is lost. Identity is nowhere. Everybody, in this sense, is suffering within this world. You get this repeated, and you heard a little bit in what I was talking about, this repeated stylistic turn where there are long stretches of language, and you can go on for quite a while without finding a period. And this is another Kafkaesque trait. The long paragraph, the long sentence is a way of drowning the reader. You get lost in there. You get confused. You have to start backtracking and finding out, okay, now wait a minute, what was the subject of this sentence and which is the verb? Because in between there might be half a dozen clauses that are burying you all over the place. The original German is worse. Most translations start, trying to cut those up a little bit, but German sentences are notoriously long to begin with. But these long sentences tend to disorient. They tend to confuse. You can go into them and just get lost. It's like walking into a cobweb, and it's just all over you, and you have no idea where to go from there. And making sense out of that is often quite confusing. Case in point. About halfway through the story, the artist now submitted completely, his head lolled over on his breast as if it had landed there by chance. His body was hollowed out. His legs, in a spasm of self-preservation, clung close to each other at the knees, yet scraped on the ground as if they were not really solid, as if they were only trying to find solid ground. The whole weight of his body, the featherweight after all, relapsed into one of the ladies who, looking around for help and panting a little, this post of honor was not at all what she had expected it to be, was first stretched her neck as far as she could to keep her face at least free from contact with the artist, when finding this impossible and her more fortunate companion not coming to her aid but merely holding extended on her own trembling hand the little bunch of knucklebones that was the artist, to the great delight of the spectators, burst into tears and had to be replaced by an attendant who had been stationed in readiness. That is one sentence. Now, it is broken up by a lot of little semicolons, and he's doing an awful lot of grammatical tricks in there, but that is one sentence. And you get in there, and it's just going, and it's bizarre. And that's just the form. That is the form trying to swallow any sense and give you a sense of confusion and almost paranoia. Also notable in that little sentence, long sentence, is a focus on the animal physicality of it. His body hollowed out, his legs in a spasm of self-preservation clung close to each other at the knees. There's no sense of an individuality or even a humanity there. It is all just not denaturalized, but denuded humanity. There is a sense of an animal reduction at this point, where everything recognizably human about him has been stripped away. Should be said, by his own volition. He volunteers to do this. This is his profession, and he actually is quite fond of it. And they say at certain points that he doesn't want to eat. At the end of these durations, they say that they tend to go around 40 days before they start to eat a little something again to keep living. And significantly, the little detail that they put in there is that it's not even the hunger artist's hunger that drives the end of that cycle, but rather the audience's boredom. Okay, well, he's not dead yet. Let's see, maybe there's somebody else. So at the end of 40 days, the audience gets bored and they try to move on. So at the end of 40 days, the showbiz people, the impresario, will come in and start to take them off and start to feed them very dramatically, very theatrically, very publicly, to perform this nourishment. Often against this one particular hunger artist's wishes, apparently, who it's always lingering in the back of his head. Well, no, I can go longer. I can go longer. I can set another record. I can do something more dramatic. Just let me go just a little bit longer. He doesn't have that opportunity because he is squelched out by this system that is set up that says that, well, no, at the end of 40 days, you have to do something different. And just sitting there and decomposing is not all that interesting after a while. So you have to go through this dramatic re-nourishing, and they go off stage for a couple of days perhaps, and then they come back and they're going to start starving again. And it is it's a bizarre dynamic. The emotionalism that is manipulated and alternately squelched in this system is remarkable. As the story progresses, the hunger artist gets less and less popular. Perhaps the fad is changing. Fashions, what are you going to do? And he's finding himself the audiences are thinning out. He's not as popular anymore. This is the story of showbiz. This is kind of what happens. The story of art in general. So the impresario hurried him over half Europe to discover whether the old interest might still survive here and there. Half Europe. We have no sense of a specific location in any of this. It's written in German. Prague was from, of course, what was, Eastern Europe. But it's a vague landscape. We're not given any details about where this actually is. And by suppressing those kinds of details, it takes you out of this world. It can be anywhere and it can be nowhere, but it gives you a sense of otherworldliness because all of these other details are placed very deliberately. The absence of a detail that is so, standard, a setting, the absence of that detail is more telling in a way than providing just like, we'll just make one up, yeah, sure, Cleveland, sure, why not? He never came to America. But this sense of indistinct locale just also, it gives a sense of the world out of joint. The world is very unrecognizable. You don't have any familiar landmarks, and this person who is just being reduced in his humanity to a kind of animal state has no notion of recognizable culture around him. Everything seems foreign. So anyway, he he's starting to lose his popularity. He's trying to, work those new angles, and he hires himself to a large circus. You get the sense that this is sort of a little cheaper now. This is, it's like a movie star suddenly going and doing a sitcom. It's a little. This is not what he would be doing just a couple of years earlier, but the market is changing, and you have to go where people are paying the bills. But even that, it's not particularly hospitable to him. The reaction he gets is not what he might have hoped for. And within that, you see this very recognizable humanity also, because the reinforcement, the support, the emotional support that he feels, the nourishment from the audience that he feels is being withdrawn. And all of the nourishment that he doesn't take in food, he would get from those rapt audience members who would sit there and just, sort of emotionally cheer him on. That is gone, and he is left starving for that. And you get this sense of this very identifiable human emotion swallowed up by this system. A large circus with its enormous traffic and replacing and recruiting men, animals, and apparatus can always find a use for people at any time, even for a hunger artist, which is a kind of a slighting way of phrasing it, even for him. Provided, of course, that he does not ask too much, if he's cheap enough. And in this particular case, anyhow, it was not only the artist who was taken on, but his famous and long-known name, which we don't know as well, but it's a very public-facing, performative aspect of the show. Indeed, considering the peculiar nature of his performance, which was not inspired by advancing age, it could not be objected that there was an artist past his prime, no longer at the height of his professional skill, seeking a refuge in some quiet corner of a circus, which just makes it seem like it's diminishing him even further in that public esteem aspect. He's being humiliated in a whole new way here. On the contrary, the hunger artist averred that he would fast as well as ever, which was entirely credible. He even alleged that if he were allowed to fast as he liked, and this was at once promised him without more ado, he could astound the world by establishing a record never yet achieved, a statement which certainly provoked a smile among the other professionals, since it left out of account the change in public opinion which the hunger artist, in his zeal, conveniently forgot. Now this again is another long sentence that is somewhat disorienting the reader and just browbeating the reader into this, he's gonna do it, he's gonna make it work, he's, just give him a chance. But it's stretching that out so that it seems all the more vulnerable and pathetic. It's somehow more thin as you go along, and you get the sense that the system itself, the artistic market, if you will, the public, is smothering this person's humanity. This person's desire for approval is being crushed by the audience and the lack of the audience, the apathy of everything he sees. Public interest never really catches on. People start, they put his cage or wherever in a convenient spot for passersby on their way to something else that they really want to see, and time goes on and nobody's really paying any attention to him, and it's pathetic to read. And this waning public interest is just sad, and it's a very familiar story. And in the end, he is, we get the first direct speech in the very end of the story, when we're first allowed to hear this individual whose individuality itself has been crushed, offers some words for the first time. We're given quotation marks. These are the sentences that he said, which is interesting because it's his words that are just now manifesting themselves after everything in his spirit has been sort of destroyed along the way. One of his audience members poked into the straw with sticks and found him in it, sticking him like he's an animal. "Are you still fasting?" asked the overseer. "When on earth do you mean to stop?" "Forgive me, everybody," whispered the hunger artist. Only the overseer, who had his ear to the bars, understood him. "Of course," said the overseer, and tapped his forehead with a finger to let the attendants know what state the man was in. "We forgive you. I always wanted you to admire my fasting." Admire is a curious word there. Translations of Kafka have always been various and problematic, but that's a curious word choice there. "Because I have to fast, I can't help it," said the hunger artist. "What a fellow you are," said the overseer. "And why can't you help it?" "Because," said the hunger artist, lifting his head a little and speaking with his lips pursed as if for a kiss, dying for the embrace of the public, for some sort of nourishment again. Right into the overseer's ear so that no syllable might be lost. "Because I couldn't find the food I liked. If I had found it, believe me, I should have made no fuss and stuffed myself like you or anyone else." These were his last words, also the first ones that we've heard from him. But in his dimming eyes remained the firm, though no longer proud persuasion that he was still continuing to fast. He doesn't even really care about the fasting itself. It's just that he never found anything that would nourish him and make him happy, or fulfill him as a human being. So the only choice he had was the negation of all fulfillment. And then in a final insult, they don't even move him out. They move a panther in. And this panther is a bigger hit than he was. And presumably he's still just lying there in the middle of the straw, although maybe the panther finds him, because the panther is referenced in how much he likes to eat. But the panther is a kind of appropriate fit for this venue, for this gawking public that goes by, and he seems quite comfortable and quite happy, and in very specific details, in very specific terms. The panther was all right. The food he liked was brought him without hesitation by the attendants. He seemed not to miss his freedom. You don't care that he's in a cage. His noble body, furnished almost to the bursting point with all that it needed, seemed to carry freedom around with it, too. Somewhere in his jaws it seemed to lurk, and the joy of life streamed with such ardent passion from his throat that for the onlookers it was not easy to stand the shock of it. But they braced themselves, crowded round the cage, and did not want ever to move away. The panther is pure physicality. It is animal expression. He is fine eating anything. Doesn't really care about anybody watching him. He's not performing necessarily. He is just being, and he is fine with that. And other people can be interested in that. The hunger artist had to perform, had to do something. And even if that something was a total negative, do not eat. And there is a sense of the hunger artist was hating his body necessarily. He was always punishing it, which is to not eat, to not nourish it with, or nourish at least the animal passion of it, the animal instincts of it. And this panther is completely at home, just being an animal, and eating whatever it needs or doing whatever it needs to survive. And the hunger artist is held up in very distinct contraposition to that panther. And we're supposed to figure out, well, what is the relationship between the two? But of course, the real thing is, we don't know. There is no clear answer. Maybe the panther is supposed to be the opposite of the hunger artist. Maybe he's supposed to be another side to the coin. Maybe they're supposed to be the same thing in different ways. We don't know. This is Kafka's expressionism, which has a tendency to sublimate all logic and form